For this video, we're going to show married students how to think about financial aid eligibility. This is a big thing in the world of college financing and just pursuing an education. And I think people don't really think about the implications of what it means to be married and what hacks are available for married students to pay less in your degree. So I'm going to show you some strategies that you probably haven't thought about before, including grants and loans and just how to be really smart about the situation. And I think you're going to walk away really shocked at how people just don't think about these big hacks at all and just how expensive it is when you just don't actually think about strategies behind what to do about financial aid as a married student. So let's take a look at the different options available. So if you are under 24 years old, you're independent only if you're married. So if you think about what that means, right? If you are under 24, let's just say you're dating seriously, maybe you're engaged, right? And you have some control over whether or not you're actually legally married. So, if you are a dependent student of a family that has a lot of dependents where your parents don't make a whole lot of income, right? Then in that situation, you might actually have a lower expected family contribution. In that scenario, you might qualify for more grants, more need-based aid, right? Whereas let's say you do get married, well, if your spouse has a significant income and you could have been, not counted as married for the purposes of financial aid, you might have saved some money that way. Now, I think the vast majority of people do not think about, whether or not to get married based off of financial aid, and I don't blame you, but it is something to think about. Now, when you're 24 years or older, it's a little bit more straightforward because you're an independent student for the purposes of aid, regardless of whether or not you're married or not. So that is a big change. It's a big difference in the way the financial aid works. And if you think about what that means, then it's more of a decision of, do you want to count only your income in the calculation, or do you want to count both of your incomes in the calculation for financial aid? And the way that would work is if your spouse has a modest income, then a family size of 2 is more than 1, and so you would maybe qualify for more aid than you would as a single individual if you have a family with 2 people in it to support. Now, that's really the math that I would think about is, how many people in your family do you support? Let's say you're, in your late 20s or early 30s and you're going back for a degree program and you have children, well, then your need is even greater because you're an independent student and you have a lot of, expenses that you would need to borrow for and cover. Now, a lot of times people that are, married with children tend to be going back for some kind of master's degree or graduate degree. And then in that scenario, you're probably not going to get very much need-based aid. You're probably going to get primarily loans. And let me share that the loan side of things can be used very strategically if you're married. It's not just about grants, right? I mean, a Pell Grant, if you're going for undergrad, is a few $1,000s. It is something, but it's not that much. Subsidized student loans, yeah, you get some positive interest while in school, but again, it's not that special to get some subsidized loans, really, with all these different programs that are out there now for student loans. So let me give you an example. Let's just say that you've got a married couple, one of them's pursuing a graduate degree for nursing, right? And then you've got, let's say, one child at home, maybe eventually you'd like to have another one, right? And let's say your spouse is working. Well, that nurse is going back for, let's just say that nurse is going back for a graduate degree, just to make it a little easier. So you might choose to just borrow for tuition and not borrow for living expenses at all. And if you do that, think about the fact that you'll probably qualify for public service loan forgiveness, which means that you'll pay the same amount of money, 10% of your income, right? Whether you have 50,000 of student loans or 150,000 of student loans. And if you have a family and you're married and you have, a family size of 3, well, you'll qualify for significantly more loans than somebody would as a single individual because of cost of living, for a family size of 3 versus 1. Now, a lot of times this is not even looked at in terms of, how much money you make. You can get the loans if you're just going to the program. You don't need to have any special need-based reasons for the loans if you're going back for a program. So if you can potentially get loan forgiveness, then the smartest thing you can do from a financial aid perspective is to be strategic about how much you borrow. Under the current rules for student loans, especially if you could get if you're going to some full-time government or public sector type of job after graduation, it would be silly not to take out the maximum of loans you qualify for. And if you're married with children or just married compared to being single, you can take out more money in loans based off of living expenses that can be forgiven. And you should do that even if you can afford to pay for it out of pocket. So for financial aid for married couples, thinking about, what's the best way to optimize things, what you really need to do is think about, what is your status going to be, independent versus dependent? You need to be thinking about, does it make sense to include my spouse in my calculations for financial aid purposes? You need to think through, am I making sure that I have everyone in my family counted for the purposes of financial support along with how much I'm allowed to borrow, right? And then remember that loans can be used very strategically if you're married in the financial aid process. And if you qualify for certain types of loan forgiveness programs, it can effectively be a backdoor grant, which is really crazy because in some cases, these backdoor grants, disguised as loans, can be the full cost of attendance, including living expenses almost, depending on how much 10% of your income represents if you qualify for one of these loan forgiveness programs. So this is the kind of stuff that Student Loan Planner does all the time. If you need a consult, you can go to studentloanplanner.com. I would love to hear what your questions are about financial aid as a married couple. What obstacles have you run into? What challenges have you faced? If you want to share, put it in the comments. And thanks for following and subscribing to Student Loan Planner.